everybody. Welcome to the Game Junkie Show, episode 13. Are games getting easier? I am joined here today I'm actually very excited by these guests today. Here is our favorite philosophical gamer, Gurney.
Hello.
Back for the second week in a row, my homeboy, who only drops dubs, Logic.
Hey, how you doing?
And the beast from the east, Akira, is with us today.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. So, some conversations came up recently on Twitter, and it kind of got me thinking about gaming back in the 80s and how I felt like games were harder. Today, games are a lot more complex and there's more buttons, but they do feel fundamentally easy to me, and I don't know why that is. Are we getting better as gamers? Are they changing the way that they're making games, or is technology to blame, like having a YouTube guide available? So we're kind of going to talk a little bit about that today. Logic, I'm going to start with you. Do you think games like Bloodborne or Sekiro, right? You have some games that by design, they're supposed to be really hard. Do you think the player base would have the same results if these games came out before social media and like before YouTube and before the days of having all these online guides?
So, so I'm going to be swimming a little bit upstream because your intro on the topic was kind of a pivot from what I was expecting. Because I thought the conversation was going to be about, and I guess it will come around to game design and kind of some of the other inherent properties of games as they've transitioned over the years. So your question, I guess I'm kind of answering it with a question too. When you talk about, I think, how those games have been received, and how they kind of exist within the zeitgeist, and how they are treated and kind of evaluated by fans. Are you asking if that would have been different back in the 80s in terms of you perceive that it's negative now, and it may have been more positive when you couldn't respond right and express your feelings about a game immediately, or do you think it's positive now, and the take may have been vastly different back in that time period?
That's actually kind of a smarter interpretation than I was thinking. In my mind, it was just essentially getting through hard games. Seems like it's a little easier now because we can go online and find guides. We can go on Twitter and say like, "Hey, where did you find this thing?" or "How do you solve that puzzle?" We didn't have that back then. So when people are receiving these games today and they're just taking a crap on these games because they're really hard, would people have had that same dynamic back then? So essentially, has the technology of today kind of made us a little entitled, or like just kind of your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I don't know that I feel that way. I think the way I feel is that um, they're kind of the same. Um, because of shifts in the dynamic. So you think about a game like Battletoads, and you think about other games that were just kind of inherently different back in the day, and a lot of times they were different not because of a conscious reason, right? So your Souls games and your Bloodborne games and your Sekiro, and I know my co-host on the Enough to Keep Going weekly podcast would remind me that I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly because it's not as in the correct Japanese form. But those games, if you take game design as a 360-degree um, set of vectors that can be taken, there's one of those vectors that is challenge, um, or approachability or digestibility of the gamer. That is an inherent conscious choice that From Software and other game development companies made to take that particular factor and emphasize and prioritize it and stretch it in a certain direction. Arguably, potentially, right? They then didn't focus on other elements of the game, or those maybe became diluted in terms of how people digest them and consume them and understand them, who haven't played them. Whereas back in the day, like a game like Battletoads, some games were just inherently difficult almost as a mistake because the science of software engineering and its application to the development of games as an entertainment form wasn't as well documented and wasn't as you could say maybe disciplined. I don't know if that's the right term, but the theory and the concept behind those things were not as institutionalized and academic as it is today. And so mistakes happen. Games came into existence that had certain parameters and certain characteristics just um, because development teams were three people, right? Programming on a CRT, and nobody knew any better. Um, Nobody was inherently making a decision that, hey, I'm going to launch this game and it's going to be inherently difficult, and that's the crowd I'm trying to appeal to, and so it's going to have this level of traction on the market because of these inherent properties of the game.
I never even thought about that. That's a great take.
I love
So
it.
it may have been that some games were a lot harder back there because of the limitations of really
Yeah.
the production process, and it was relatively new, so we didn't know then what we know now. So it may not have been intentional that some of those games were so brutal.
Well, and I'm sucking up a lot of airtime, so I want to make sure I get off the mic and give Gertie and Kira a chance to weigh in on this. Um,
No.
I think, I think the outcome wasn't as necessarily deterministic as it is today. I
Mm.
don't know that I believe that the uptake on the consumer end was vastly different because back then you had today, yes, absolutely, we can Google things. People write guides, people write, here's how to do this, right? I'm trying to figure out how to get diamond weapons in Call of Duty, right? I can go find a video, right, about that. But back in the day, you also had cheat codes, right? And you had things that you could do to hack a game. um, Things were code wasn't as locked down as it was. Pirating a game and employing workarounds was uh, less difficult and less complex back then than it is today. So I feel like there were ways and methods to get around things. You had like I think you said, you had cheat codes, you had game genies, right? So you had all
Yes.
these other things, right, to allow you to work around those things. Um, and I think it equates to the types of workarounds. Today, it's harder to hack a game, right? But um, quite frankly, I had problems at the very end of Half Life, like the very last level, right? I got to a point where I'd spent enough time in the game. I felt I'd gotten my ROI out of it. I said, look, I'm just going to go to YouTube and watch the ending, right? And that, at my game, there was actually a glitch because I was playing through the ending, years after the game had developed, and on Windows 10, like it didn't behave correctly. So there are workarounds today, but I also feel that there were workarounds in the past as well.
That's a great take. I didn't even think of
Yeah.
looking at it from a development standpoint, but that's a I said you only dropped huge dubs, and there's one right there. Um,
Yeah.
Akira, what do you kind of want to chime in
Yeah.
on that?
I actually, what Logic said, it reminds me of, I don't know if you heard about this. Remember Fear?
Oh,
Remember
yes,
that? Remember that amazing AI was caused by a mistake?
Alma was her name, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, I think the AI in Fear, the amazing AI where it can, it can read what you do basically is what we experience. From our standpoint, it looked like it knows where to place the AI knows where to place itself. It knows how to sneak behind us. It knows these things basically. But the genius of the AI was created by a mistake. And that mistake actually made the game harder because it had better AI. So it
Hmm.
kind of reminds me of what Logic said. Only Fear was also an old game, so technically people were still figuring out on how to manage the game, and I don't think they wanted it to be difficult on purpose, but it just became difficult because of that mistake. So I can relate to what Logic said. Now about difficulty. I've been watching and reading a lot of game history because I'm just really interested in it. And back in the day, when video games were a big hit, it's because they were competitive. They were just really difficult, and people wanted to be the best, and that's why there were competitions about it. It was like Space Invaders kind of kind of games basically where you just shoot things and have a high score was competitive back in the day until more and more we get into where games become more of an art form, and I think because of it becoming an art form, more games are becoming easier because it needs to attend to the art form, being able to tell a story, for example. Being able to tell a story properly can be distracting if the game is too challenging. For example, if you got the Soulsborne games, they got stories, they got lores, but they don't really focus on them because, as you know, I mean, if you would focus on the stories, it might be not as what do you call this? Not you cannot be as focused as you are because you were more focused on staying alive uh, in the game. You know, you're too focused on your strategies. You're too focused on, I don't know, your builds, your weapons, your what you do next, how you move. Do you have enough potions? You know, all these things to think about when you play a Soulsborne game. And uh, back back in the day, also back in the day when you games have cheat codes and magazines. That's what we had. It was not as easy to gain to have information on the go like today with Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, anywhere, Walkthrough's, Twitch. You can basically also watch everywhere now. So that also makes it easier for people to engage compared to back in the day. And also, my last point would be some games, a lot of games in modern gaming really holds your hand now. Uh, Way too much, even for my taste. Like back in the day, you get to figure out stuff for yourself. They give you a small tutorial, and then you figure stuff out, right? But nowadays, there's really a lot of hand-holding going on with most games, especially story-driven ones. I I posted this on Twitter once, and not a lot of people understood me. I said something like, "I am not a huge fan of collided animations." And when I tried to explain what that was, for me, collide animation is like when you are a bit far away from an enemy and you press the punch button, it looks like it's gonna magnet you towards the enemy. You know, like what you see in an Uncharted game, for example. If you
I
play
know what you mean.
Uncharted and
Hmm.
you press the punch button with a bit of distance from the enemy, and it looks like it's gonna magnet you towards the face of the enemy, right? And I call those collide animation because they are kind of hand holding you to put you where you should be to be able to hit the enemy. For example,
It's
if
like an
you play
auto. It's kind of like an auto
exactly
assist
auto assist,
function.
exactly
Okay.
compared to I don't know if you played a game like Ninja Gaiden or Godhand. If you try to play like Godhand or Ninja Gaiden, when you played those games back in the day, or Devil May Cry, they don't have this auto assist things. You
Gotcha.
don't you don't even have even story driven. Let's say story driven Metal Gear. You don't have an auto assist on a Metal Gear game. Even if you use the CQC combat, close quarter, you still need to go towards your enemy. You need to plan or you need to strategize, and then you need to hit that button near that enemy, or else it's not gonna hit. And it
That
doesn't
makes a
have
lot
that
of
auto
sense.
assist.
So it's
But
really, I mean,
now, yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah. But nowadays we have a lot of those. Even God of War, the new God of War, has that a little bit, but the old God of Wars don't have that at all. So it's kind of a lot of hand holding and auto assist in a lot of games, not all of them, but a lot of them.
Sounds
Yeah,
a lot like tech then. I mean, what Logic said and what you're saying now is the technology that what we can do, right? What we can do development wise
yeah,
has obviously affected games. And when you said narrative, I really can't think of a ton of games I played back in the 80s and 90s that were as heavily story driven as they are today, which
yeah.
does change the focus. Gurney, what's your kind of weigh in on what we're discussing at the moment?
Yeah, with what Akira said, I know what he's talking about too, because I think it kind of goes along with why the Souls games are hard, is because it requires more focus and precision, which does require you to concentrate more. You can't just casually walk up to something and hit it. A recent game I played that I think that doesn't have what Akira is talking about is like Chivalry 2, because you have to be extremely conscious of the point of your sword and momentum and stuff like that. And so, speaking of old versus new, I think um, like there's a lot more in-depth mechanics, I think, of on something like a Souls game, and a lot of the challenge comes from the complexities of things that you only learn through playing and absorbing information. Um, and so the games aren't just. I don't think they're just hard because of it's really complex. I think why those games are hard. But to answer the original question of what you said of like games in the 80s versus there's a lot of uh the real test I think would be to let new players just play an old game. Is it hard, for them? Like it- and those games, I think I was thinking about this earlier. What really separates them? I think it's consequence. Like consequences have kind of been taken out of new games. You have instant respawns. You don't have lives. You have regenerating healths. You don't have health pickups in a lot of games anymore. There's so many things that kind of dumb down the experience, as what I was saying on Twitter, like a dumbing down. And I was also thinking of a great illustration too. Um, people like the people right now are working on making like automated cars, right, which would take away the sensation of driving. A lot of people love to drive. They like to feel the wheel in their hands. They like to, a lot of people prefer stick shifts sometimes because it adds more mechanical depth to doing the action. There's a lot more pleasure that can be extracted, whereas like where a car that drives itself, you get into it, you're no longer enjoying being engaged. You're simply along for the ride, which I think a lot of new games just kind of take you for a ride, and they're not engaging the complexities of the intellect, in my opinion. Which is why I think the games like the Soulsborne games, they're so hard because there's so many mechanics that aren't revealed to you that you're slowly uncovering as you play them. Um, and there is consequence when you die, having to restart and enemies being completely repopulated hurts your being. It makes you be like, okay, if I die at this part, I'm going to lose 12,000 souls or 100,000 souls, and I'm going to be reverted all the way back to the beginning. That hurts. Whereas like if I die in like an Assassin's Creed game, it's like beep, instant reload. I'm back to where I was, and I'm doing the same thing that I was doing. There's no risk and reward. There's no sense of loss. It's just back to it. So in that way, it's almost like an automated car, to where the more dumbed down the games kind of get, the less the pleasure of driving the game and playing the game, and in my personal experience, can kind of become. Granted, that's not every game. I love a lot of new games, but I do think the games that have a lot of rich mechanical depth are far fewer and far between, and people complain a lot about mechanical depth these days. Like talk like weapon degradation is an example of a mechanic that drives aspects of the game that the player may not even be conscious about. Because your weapon breaks, you then have to engage to finding another weapon, which drives exploration. So it's like there's a pain when your weapon breaks because you like a certain weapon and you get comfortable. The weapon breaking takes away that sense of familiarity, and it forces you to go find something else, which drives the player's motives. It gives the reason a player to explore. Um, you know, Whereas like a game again, like Assassin's Creed, your weapon doesn't break. You just keep going. You keep on plowing through enemies. So it becomes this mind numbing experience that you're not even engaged with because there's so many options that will work to progress forward. Whereas like as in an old game, you had a lot of linear design. So literally, in order to progress, you would have to find the next crease or piece of design element in the environment that was pushing you towards the story. Like the story would unfold as opposed to like a lot of games now are open world, which are progressed kind of at the player's pace. You have to go to point A to progress the story. And I mean, I think that's where games have become easier. There's so many more options at our fingertips that the player doesn't really have to think quite as difficult or quite as complexly of how they're going to progress. So
That makes sense. I mean, when you said that, Logic had mentioned Battletoads earlier. Still could never beat that game, but the feeling of like thinking you could get close, and then it contra Ninja Gaiden. It took me. I think what
Oh,
I was 7, I think, when I beat it, and it was like, I mean, it was devastating to
because there's a
to be
particular point.
punished.
There's a
Ninja Gaiden.
particular point. Like there's literally a roadblock. If you cannot get past that point, you do not see the rest of the game. You have to overcome that specific needle point roadblock in the game to progress. You know?
Yeah,
And Ninja Gaiden also has this consequence where if you don't hit a checkpoint, it's gonna throw you back so far away if you die.
yeah, those
Basically,
checkpoints were
yeah. Like
rough.
technically, Ninja Gaiden, the first one, it required you to save to even have a checkpoint. So if you didn't find a save in a long way of battle that you survived and you die, you go back to the very back and you need to fight your way all
Yeah,
over
I
again.
know. You're
Yeah.
you're making me feel 1988 again. Logic, I want to roll back to you on this, Logic, and I kind of want to know what your thoughts are. If we took somebody that, let's say, is relatively newer to gaming, they started gaming around maybe the PS4 stage, give or take. If we sent them back in time and had them play, some of the games from the 80s or 90s that we grew up with, do you think it would be a drastically different experience, or like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll start getting a little bit into the twist of this thing that turns it on its head. Um, it would be a vastly different experience to them because games back then were not as complex. There was not as much story. And I question, having lived through those decades, right? What was I have this mathematical conceptual figure that I sometimes refer to, which is my EROI, my little E, my entertainment return on investment. And
Love it.
and so, ROI, quantifying that in terms of money, is a relatively easy thing and a concept that most of us get. But EROI gets a little more complex. It involves not only the money that's expended, but also my time, right? And so you mentioned Battletoads and the fact that you couldn't get through it and you couldn't complete the game. Gurney has talked about consequence, which and I get how Gurney, how you're referencing consequence. When I intermix that with EROI, I start going, I couldn't finish Battletoads because it was too hard. Do I care? There's not that much story in it. What's the point of me knocking my head against that particular brick wall, right? And we use this term on Enough to Keep Going. It's not my term. It's one of the co-hosts, DBQ Hams, bouncing off of a game, right? So as we get deeper into this topic, because I know that deeper into this topic, there are points that I disagree with or have a difference of opinion on. I have a threshold where there's a point in a game in a given genre based on how much story and what my potential EROI is out of it that I go, yep, thank you very much, I'm done, right? And so you take someone who let's take Assassin's Creed, which in my opinion, you could argue about it. Let's just say that game has a story, right? There is a point of getting through the 31 hours and getting to the end and seeing that narrative unfold, right? If I go back to Pac-Man, right, I don't get any story out of completing that, right? And so my EROI is fairly limited, I think, right? And why would I invest my time? Why would I invest my time in that instead of going and watching a television show, right, or a movie with a deeper story?
Mhm.
So there's a nexus point, right, where those things converge, where I start going, yes, maybe those games were more difficult if we want to talk about it from that way, but the output of that to me was fairly shallow, right? And
Yes.
it's especially in terms of like most of their challenge was heavily oriented around a physical kinetic challenge of what your digital dexterity was, right? And actually, quite honestly, a large part of my gaming story is the fact that as a kid, I went to arcades. I lived in that culture where people like walked up to a machine and you put your quarter on the machine, and if you got beaten, you got off, right? And I got tired of it. It was pointless for me. right? Whether I got a higher score than somebody in Galaga, like I could care less, right? Exercising that was not exercising my intellect. That was not right. And I actually bought my first console. My parents bought one for me before, but I bought my first console so I could take my gaming experience at home, so I didn't have to deal with that, right? And I was never interested in going to the arcade. One thing that Akira mentioned about how games kind of hold your hand, I just want to maybe throw a word of caution about not wanting to have that confused with onboarding, right? And training, because games are a game is a system of systems, right?
That's a great
There's
point.
Very true.
right, and so
Yeah.
and they're supposed to teach you, right, how to navigate through that. And so there are games that do things because there's an inherent tutorial. And I think about games. One of my big genres is flight sims, right? You go back to a flight sim of the 80s, those flight sims did not have tutorials, right? There's no flight instructor in the cockpit with you. You just got a big honking manual, right? And you were supposed to figure out how to fly the plane. And I don't know that was a better experience. It was more difficult, not necessarily because it was more challenging. I would argue that flight sims of today are more challenging because they're more realistic. It was challenging because there was no onboarding, right, at the software level.
Hmm.
It was all just reading a bunch of text, which didn't convey to you the reality of flying an aircraft, right? Whereas today I can go into a game, a flight sim, and I can get through a tutorial, and I can get that presented to me, and the environment's a little more realistic. Now, in games that are different than the Souls types of games in their design, a huge thing that then makes that onboarding more palatable for some people, depending on the level of difficulty in the game, is sliders and changing difficulty levels, and things that allow them to. A lot of times in a flight sim, because I'm trying to scale my learning curve, right? Because I can't go from 0 to 100, right? A lot of times I will remove. Make sure I get this right. I will remove the avionics problem, right? If flying a plane is two large problems, it's the airplane physics, and then there's the digital cognitive load, right? Of a bunch of buttons and widgets and levers and dials and knobs, right? If I use Gurney's terms, I dumb down the avionics, because while I'm trying to understand the physics model, I don't need to be bothered with the avionics, right? And then I start scaling up the avionics the more familiar I get with the flight sim. So um, there's a few different topics in that, and I think a way in which games have become more complex in a way that I personally think games offer more now, that changes that formula. And so if I'm telling a story, I don't know that from a design perspective I put a hard impediment on the player that they can't surmount and they can't get by. Because what's their ERI? If they spend $60 on my game and they're not able to ever get through the story, I probably don't expect that customer to come back for a repeat performance.
Dude,
That's fair.
I mean, did I not tell you he dropped dubs?
Yeah.
And
Dude.
and I was thinking to myself, wondering, why do games seem easier for me? I love narrative games. I love those cinematic cut sequences. That's why it's the kind of games I'm playing, and I'm not being held back as much by that intended difficulty. I just discovered something about myself and my entire theory. Logic, you've solved the puzzle to my gaming life.
What's it? Can you explain ERO? What is it? EORI or whatever?
ERI?
EROI. Definitely. Let's dig into that some more.
Yeah, yeah. Let me
Yeah,
write
so
that
it's
down.
so if I can, let me. Hoping I can do this. Can I present this to you guys real quick?
Oh my God! If you
I
have
think so.
spreadsheets, he has a
What?
I have a diagram. So
Ah!
so I went through this. Unfortunately, I've been gaming a long time, and that causes certain problems as you get older. So I went through this, and probably a little bit of what you're saying, Priscilla, that you've been going through, which is, I always kind of jokingly talk about this, gamer know thyself, right? And that's, so EROI, Gurney, to me it's the conflux of what is my investment in a game, and and so there's money, there's time, and then what do you get out of it? Different people get different things out of gaming, and they ascribe different value to that. So a Call of Duty player puts a huge ton of value, probably because there's not a lot of story in Call of Duty. A Call of Duty player, some Call of Duty players put a huge amount of value on their ED or KD rating, right? That's my number that shows whether or not bro Magnus, right? And then there are other Call of Duty players that put an emphasis on their win ratio because they're team players and they are worried about, how well do I do at domination. Some Call of Duty players put an emphasis on how well they do at search and destroy, right? Which I can't stand because it invokes a ton of idle time that you spend not actually playing the game. That's another topic is that idle time thing. But it's also in this mix, right? Is if I spend a lot of downtime in a game like I do with Rainbow Six Siege, I don't get as much EROI out of that, right? And so for an hour of gaming, I only get so much back, right? So my EROI in my mind is lower on a Rainbow Six Siege or on a Call of Duty Search and Destroy than me playing Call of Duty Free for All or some of the other objective based modes where I just play, 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 play. Um, one of the other things I think that you mentioned before, Crystal, was and I also I started thinking about this actually outside of games, but about golf. And I sometimes bring up this analogy too, right? You go me, you go out and you play 18 holes of golf, and which was already a challenge for me to surmount because I felt like spending the time to play 18 holes of golf was a questionable use of someone's time. But you go out and you drive, you get one drive right per each hole, right? Out of those 18 drives, I hit one straight and down the fairway, right? And incorrectly, I tell myself in my mind, yeah, man, I can do this, right? And the fact is, the other 17 holes, I completely flub, and it's a completely horrible experience. But that one time, there's an adrenaline rush and a euphoria that I get out of that, and that sometimes
Mm.
confuses the perception of the ERI. But this diagram to me is I came up with this a couple years ago, and I started kind of thinking about all the elements of game design and things that you get out of a game and things that hold value for me. And so I have mechanical feedback in the upper left hand corner because and I'm not saying it's the same today, but I generally get value out of a game out of using like my special controllers, right? So I think you could see some of my joysticks and my wheel and pedals and all my mechanical specialized devices, which is probably heavily why I'm
Mm.
a big PC gamer. Then there's cognitive joy. You already mentioned, pulling apart some of these design elements in mechanics in games, and I just wanted to throw out those sometimes aren't the only cognitive things that cause cognitive receptors to fire. I'm a big strategy gamer, right? So I get way more enjoyment out of something like a Civ 6 or a real time strategy game,
Yeah.
which is which is more similar to some of my background than I get from if I played a Souls game and spent a lot of time banging my head against a brick wall trying to understand the mechanics, right? Progression models are a big thing for me, right? Having ranks and levels and quite honestly loot, right? But feeling like I run from one goalpost to the other goalpost, and out of that I become a better thing, right, for the next iteration. And then story consumption is a part of what I was interested in, at least at the time, right? I have to feel like I'm getting a narrative out of this because I play games instead of watching TV and spending and watching movies more so today than in the past. And so my way of experiencing narrative is through gaming, and so I'm more interested in games that convey that kind of a story. I was less interested again at the time at something like a Call of Duty or definitely, for instance, an Apex Legends, right, which has no in-game story. And all of that to me converges at this thing that I talk about as optimal fulfillment, right? Those are the four factors that to me have the highest value. That if I spend an hour of gaming, right, I get out of it, and those things can stretch. So a game like a flight sim can have a ton of mechanical feedback and cognitive joy, low on story assumption and certain flight sims will be low on progression model because they're not you don't make a pilot and have like a logbook and like and progress through the story and promote. But mechanical and cognitive joy can go high. Story consumption and progression model could be a little lower, and that still rounds out in an overall like high EROI for me.
Dude,
I got
that is
a
amazing.
so I
Like,
got a question. Sorry. Uh, Game Logic. About EROI, I asked this question once on Twitter because I was wondering if I was the only one feeling it. when you play a game, is there this certain specific thing that you're always looking for to be more engaged in it? Like I have this weird thing that I like about a game. Like, do you know this feeling when you feel like you're having when you do something in a game and there's impact? Like the best example I can give is Titanfall 2. When you use the melee and punch someone in Titanfall 2, the impact that it gives in the sound, it just pumps me up whenever I hear it. That's why I do it a lot, and it keeps me engaged. And games who can do similarly to that impact keeps me engaged. Do you have something like that that you always look for in a game?
So on that particular note, I think, and I hate to use, I'm sorry for using the term, because I think gaming media
Uh,
and journalists leaned on it very heavily in the 2010s. But I think what you're talking about, I equate to the level of visceralness of a game, how visceral a game is.
yeah.
And yes, so on that particular note, I feel that too. I will sometimes talk about a game and its design where I feel like a game is too floaty and lightweight, like it
Mm,
doesn't do a lot for me when I talk about shooters. But there's another end of that spectrum for me where I feel like, for instance, Halo is a very kind of heavyweight, bulky game. Gears of War, right? Very
mm,
heavy. Loved the single player, not super crazy about the multi, But anyway, there's a space in between there, which to me is like Destiny, where I feel like there's impact, but it also
mm,
isn't so heavy and prodigious. So that's a thing for me. I do feel like that's not a thing that I necessarily look for. I think is my top priority in a game as I go
mm.
through it. I think those four things that I put on the screen are kind of my things that I
Uh,
probably look for, and they're not. There's none of them are like the one thing, right?
yeah, the
Every
one
single
thing. Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
I gotcha. It was really amazing.
Can I interject?
Did you make one before you made one? You made one, didn't you? I saw you made one.
Me?
Yeah. Did you make one? Did
No,
you
no, no,
draw
no,
one
no.
out?
I was
Okay.
taking notes on what Logic said. First and foremost, I would like to draw a differential here. Dude, this guy's awesome. He's very scientific. Like, he has deduced. Like, this is what an
Yeah,
adult does
Yes.
with like video games. He has deduced and distilled how he extracts fulfillment, which is great because the man knows what he wants. But you hit on some really amazing points, I think, which is which I distilled to seeing results. I think seeing results for the time that you put in is the big payoff, and I think that is something that sometimes can be missing as well. And I think what people love so much about the Souls games is people ask for an easy mode, right? But here's the thing: the longer you play, you start here in a Souls game, and you come in and you are on hard mode. But the game, as you continue to learn and get better, it gets easier as you progress. So
yeah,
the result
yeah.
of playing the game, you see the fruits of your work because you've put so much time into it. And the game kicks your ass. So you know that you haven't made progress because you're not progressing. But when you put the time in, you literally see results. It's like when because you were talking about Civilization. I love Civilization too. Like, Civilization is, you're slowly seeing the results of all these tiny micro decisions you've
Mm,
made play out into this. You see your civilization grow and prospering, and you know that you're making the right decisions, which is, it's very cool. And I also wrote down. Let's see.
I love this.
I
I
guess
absolutely love
I
this.
think
yeah,
too, it's like it's alchemy too. Like, you've kind of deduced all the different parts
yeah,
for you personally, and I think like that's the thing. Even within this chat, I think we're all very different types of gamers, and we all want to see different types. We're all fulfilled by different types of stimuli. And that's the thing. Like Assassin's Creed, where are the results?
mm,
What do you see result wise? Because I think those games are almost, for me, as I'm playing Assassin's Creed, from my own experience, and I know not everybody feels the same way, but I don't feel like progression matters in that game. I feel like I can get an axe and I can kill anybody in that game whether I
mm,
level up or not. Like, I feel like my skills aren't really affecting the game. There's nothing being, I don't see the results of the time I'm putting in because, one, the games are so big that it's almost a dilution. Like, there's a potency that's lost over too much game sometimes. and it's like dropping food coloring into a bathtub. It's like the food coloring's great. You're onto something, but you're diluting it over too much time being played
Yeah. Good
that my
point.
results are being diminished almost. Like,
Well, I think a key thing to ground that part of the conversation in is like what era of Assassin's Creed design are you talking about? Because I think that's a game that we've
yeah,
clearly seen
Ah,
follow an
the
arc.
new
So when you talk
ones.
about so the new ones, and I'll just backtrack to kind of talk about that arc, right? Because I was when we were originally talking about the comparison between an Assassin's Creed and the Souls game, I was talking about the early games, right? The
yeah.
point of the early
Yeah.
games, I would say, was the story, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The point of
Yeah.
the early games was to get from beginning of the story to the end, roughly a 30-hour experience, not a ton of on character like progression. Like you weren't necessarily earning new armor or new weapons, or that wasn't like the point of the game. And so just like you mentioned, and I love what you said, because that was the point of my diagram, is that if I argued that every gamer should have a similar diagram, you're absolutely right. They would all be different because each person is looking for something different in a stimuli. And this goes back to something I said to Crystal last time, and I think I shared in the other chat. Right, it's not up to me, right, to tell you, right, what your diagram should look like. It is
Yeah.
also not up to I think this goes down a couple different rivulets, but it's not up to other people to say this game hits on these design aspects and formulate this EROI. And if you don't consume that, then something's wrong or broken with you as a gamer. Like
Yeah.
that is the thing that drives me through the roof.
I agree. I actually totally agree.
That's actually what. But the EROI. This is actually interesting for me, especially as a hack and slash gamer. Hack and slash games are also more on challenge, but also progression model is huge because the more you play, the more you improve, the more mechanics you discover, the more combos you can make, the more easier it becomes for you. Devil May Cry is a huge example because the more you play Devil May Cry, the more easier it gets. It also has a story that you want to progress to. Got some cool cutscenes to see. You got cool visuals basically. Or the more you progress, the more cooler your moves become, and it also feels like fruits of labor is what Guernica said, because you know that Dante is not going to stay only with this attack. You're going to get more weapons. You're going to get more and gonna get level up, and you're gonna face your final boss, and then you're gonna see how great you become. So with the EROI, this was interesting with the hack and slash because the story is not a very strong part in hack and slash. So the story consumption is not really a huge part of it. But consumption, however, does it also mean that on how good the story is, or just how engaged you are to the story, despite of, let's say, how good or bad it is? Because it is consumption. You consume story, but is it because it's complex, or is it because it's just simple that that you're engaged in it or something?
I think to me it's really a matter of how it the experience, the consumption of the experience tailors to your particular taste, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I have story consumption in a quadrant, but it's not an absolute. So I mentioned, right, I'm having a struggling, quite frankly, over the last few months, trying to not play Call of Duty,
uh,
right? There's no story there in the multiplayer, right? There's a progression model, but it skews closer to the things I think you guys have talked about that your emphasis is on, which is getting better, right?
yeah,
And so I do, despite, right, my vast efforts not to, I do care a little bit about my stats, right? And I play that game, and there's a progression model. You get unlocks, you get new weapons, you get new skins, but so I'm concerned about that. But there's a thing that goes along with it, which is how am I playing? And that to me, in my mind, is kind of the old school, like when I used to go play tennis with my friends, or when I used to go play hoops with the guys, right? It wasn't necessarily um, an obsession to the point where I was like I had to be the best basketball player, but right, we enjoyed playing the game and getting out and having that experience, and that it's the video game equivalent of that pickup game of basketball each night. I mentioned, one of my big things is flights. So I'm also a big racing game fan, and
mm.
so again, there's very little story and a need for speed, right?
Yeah,
Their attempts to inject one have been questionable at best. Um, you know, but when it comes to racing, I go back to what Gurney mentioned. Like, there's a love and a joy, and I used to be a motorcyclist, right? There's a love and a joy from that mechanical interaction of driving the
Yeah.
car, and I love the variation, right? It's not that I want to get. I have a lot of friends, and you see a lot of gamers who play Forza, and they race through to unlock a particular car, and then they drive that car online all the time. And I'm like, no, I like the building of my garage to like 50 or 60 whatever cars, kind of like building Lego blocks, right? And then I'm going to take this car out today, right?
Yeah.
I don't care that it's the 1987 Corolla, right? And tops out at 87 horsepower and at a max speed of 67 miles per hour, right? I love revving that thing up to like 7,800 RPM and then not breaking the engine, right? And driving that car because it's a differentiated experience, from the other. So all those things kind of intermix, and I think that there's absolute value in a person who likes like what are the games called that are like the Dynasty Warrior games?
Oh,
The Muso
that's
games.
Yes, yeah.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
absolute value in a gamer who loves those games. There's absolute value in a gamer who likes hack and slash games. With Chivalry 2 and some of those things. It's just figuring out what toggles your particular fulfillment,
Mhm.
and determining what those factors are, and then allowing yourself to gravitate towards those types of games,
That,
Yes.
I,
regardless of challenge.
I'm making
Wow.
one. I don't know if you guys are, but I'm definitely gonna make my ROI. I would
Yeah.
actually encourage people to do that because it might be neat to see what you come up with, and then kind of like figure out maybe that's the answer to what was perplexing me. Am I
Change.
better now, or was the games different? It's you logic. You've broken 40 years of code on me in 30 minutes. It's almost like a Dr. Phil moment. Like, this is
Change
pretty cool.
perspective.
Do you guys want to talk about that a little bit more, or Logic said something else earlier that also
I
I
I
wanted to talk about too?
I want to say one more thing. I think it was you, Crystal, right? You mentioned about newer games have more mechanics now, basically, and that makes games easier as well because they got more mechanics, you got more tools, and yeah, this brings me back again to hack and slash games because in hack and slash you are required to use the tools and mechanics that you are given
Mm-hmm.
to progress, basically, because the game would be technically hard or almost impossible if you will not use what was given to you. And it was you also mentioned because back then games have lesser mechanics and that's why they're harder, which made me think a bit about, but hack and slash games can be hard but they have a ton of mechanics that you are required to use to make it easier. Miyazaki actually said something similar where he said Elden Ring is actually has no difficulty options, but it could be easier because you got more tools and you got more mechanics to play around with. Is basically what he said about Elden Ring. It's gonna be easier than the other Souls board games because maybe because you are faster. You got just way more mechanics. You got more magic. You got more more stuff. You can ride things now basically. So yeah, I think mechanics also can make games easy, but the hard part is to learn how to use the mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the difficulty starts to go because in older games, when you got few mechanics, there's is not a lot of learning that you need to do to be able to use certain mechanics effectively because the games were simpler back then. However, with some games that have more mechanics, they're kind of like the difficult part is the learning, and this is what some people are not willing to pull the trigger on is to invest the time to learn on how a game tick. For example, Sekiro is a great example because that game requires so much learning to be able to so that you can even progress the first boss, which was the guy with the horse, Oniwa, right? Yeah, yeah, that guy. But yeah, that actually that was an interesting point because I didn't realize that until you said it, Crystal. That the more mechanics and the less mechanics with old games.
I
I
mean,
didn't
at least it
realize that
felt
until you
that
said.
way. It felt
Yeah,
that way to me. Like, I mean, my first game was Joust, and it was a
yeah,
joystick
yeah,
and one button, and then it was
yeah.
two buttons and a D-pad, and then it was four buttons and little triggers, and then it was two sets of triggers. So I feel like, as you know, and now I have like a VR set with little so it just keeps progressing, and now I have
Yeah, it
more
keeps
buttons, and
progressing.
more buttons means there's more things I can do, and more. So I, I felt like that was making it easier, but for some
Yeah,
people, no, there's too many buttons. So
yeah, true.
Logic had said something earlier that
Yeah,
really resonated with me. We kind of talked about hand holding, right? Hold the hand less. But then
yeah.
Logic brought up a really good point. It is beneficial when games provide you with some kind of basic training or tutorial. Is there
Onboarding.
like, are there thresholds of where the training and tutorial maybe goes too much into hand holding,
Yes,
or the hand holding is it? So
Yeah.
absolutely.
This is the
would you
yeah.
guys want to chime in on that
That is a
uh,
great question, actually. That is
stuff?
the
Yeah,
Then
I think too. My favorite kind of tutorial is the tutorial that teaches you as you're playing. Like Breath of the Wild is a good example of a good tutorial because it gives you small safe spaces to practice the mechanics, and it never gives you more than you like. It doesn't give you too much. It like you started out and you were breaking crates, and as you were breaking crates, you were finding your pants and your shirt. And you were learning how to go into the menu and equip them, and then you get out and you're in a little bit bigger area, but yet you're still playing the game as you're teaching. Whereas like some games will completely stop and put a screen up, and it's too wordy. They're not teaching you through experiential knowledge. They're teaching you through a word set, which that can
Mhm.
be boring as hell. Like just let me play the game, but teach me as I play the game. And
Yeah,
that's my favorite kind of tutorial.
I can relate to that. Those kind of tutorials I actually skip when there's too much words on it. With tutorials, let's say I'm not so big on tutorials because I really love discovering things on my own. It's like I don't know. There's already a sense of fulfillment when you discover things on your own before the tutorial even teaches you something.
Definitely.
One great example maybe that I can fully remember because it was almost funny how the tutorial went is Metal Gear Rising. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance has such a simple tutorial. It's basically it's gonna teach you how to run, how to block, and how to attack. And after that, it's gonna tell you to kill Metal Gear, which was like the final boss from other Metal Gear games. But the funny part about it is that while you are fighting the Metal Gear, it's already a tutorial itself because whatever they teach you first is they are applying those same basic techniques in order to beat that Metal Gear because the Metal Gear was not on a very hard difficulty. It was just on a difficulty so that it can be like a sparring partner for what the game has taught you already. But after the first three things that they teach you, they're not really going to put anything anymore. No more words, no more anything. You figure out on your own, you know the basics now. And basically, the Metal Gear is a sparring partner on figuring out on how to diverge from what you've learned from the basics. And I love those kind of tutorials because there's also a sense of fulfillment where, okay, so you know the basics, and then you find out that you can do this, and then you find out that you can also do this, and you can find out you can also do this, but you only found out that you can do those things because you knew the basics.
no,
So
that
Right.
totally makes sense. I
yeah,
I agree with both of you that if it's too wordy, sometimes I skip it and then I don't know how the hell to do something. Like, how do
Right.
I throw the axe? Wait a minute, what do I push? I like learning kinetically by doing it, but I love environmental clues and like I'm a lore whore. Like I love to pick up little pieces of things and put stories together and find like little elements that might exist environmentally that help kind of guide.
Me
Those
too.
are my two things that are like those are my jams. Logic, what about you? What are your kind of thoughts on the training, hand holding?
Yeah, how long do we have tonight? Because this is a super deep topic. Um, so, man, and there's a lot of so let me
yeah,
start with the first three because we actually just recently talked about this topic on my podcast. And I expressed three design philosophies of what tutorials should be. First of all tutorials should be skippable. Nothing frustrates me more than a game where the designer has locked me into the tutorial and I can't get out of it.
It's true.
Like again, starts hitting up against my bounce off threshold, right? In games like Monster Hunter and Monster Hunter Rise, I bounced off those games because they were holding my hand for too long and there was no way to skip out of them.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but my other feeling is all tutorials should be modular. which means no tutorial should be an all-encompassing, monolithic, I'm going to teach you everything that you have to know about the game at once. I don't understand that design approach, and it frustrates me to no end. We talked a couple of weeks ago, and I've been through things like this professionally, and I have thoughts about this academically as well. I often say, look, I really wish, like, whenever I've gone through school or training, that what I'd been allowed to do was go actually do the job, and so that I started to gain some situational awareness of what all that ecosystem was and involved, and then was trained. Because
Yeah.
then I would have the ability in the classroom to understand this is important. I think I use this all the time. We laugh and joke now about memes on Twitter, but I don't know that I've used the Pythagorean theorem, every day at work. I certainly need to use math, but there's certainly certain things in math that I use every day or have to use all the time, and certain things that I was taught that, like, I don't know if that was really important. And then my third thing on tutorials, there's a little complex. It's hard for me to articulate. All games in their inherent design and how they then package those modular, skippable tutorials should allow you at any moment in time to stop what you're doing in the game and come back to the tutorial in the modular presentation, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if I'm encountering something like you just mentioned, Chris, right? If there's a mechanic that I've forgotten, right, or I need to go back and have a refresher. We do this all the time too. I feel bad. I boot up a game. I look at the date on the save file, and the date on the save file is like last calendar year, right? So I'm like, I don't remember how to do this. I should be able to go back to a tutorial set that has like a table of contents, go to the specific module I need, experience that module in a very succinct, tight format, be done with it, get back to the game where I am at the time. Because everybody learns mechanics differently. Gurney talked about, like, we all respond differently to different stimuli. Certain things are going to stick with people, certain things aren't. And then certain games are kind of bad in their design that they spend a ton of time, as I just talked about, right, teaching you how to do a thing that you don't use a heck of a lot, right? And then I'm like, a particular puzzle in Resident Evil, right? There was a puzzle that I hit that I actually had to pull out my iPad and like take some notes because I had to remember what the numbers were on the combination that I had tried. You do that like once, right? So, learning how to do that subsystem of the system of systems should be something that you can get back to if you need to learn it.
Dude, I totally agree with you. You're an
Yeah.
engineer. You're an
That's
engineer.
great.
My father-in-law is a software engineer, and you and him are like the way you think and compartmentalize and stuff. That would be my
Yeah.
guess. You have to be an engineer. Like, you have to be.
You are
Are you active on Twitter?
Yeah. Do you have a Twitter?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He
Yeah,
goes by
you need to.
Agasicles.
I need to follow you. 'Cause,
Yeah, I also need
like,
to follow you, man.
we need
I
more
would-
like scientific.
I would
minds
join
in the
your
game
podcast just to
community.
listen to you. I don't
I
even
told
need to
you
talk,
guys
man.
you were going to love him.
Like I don't even need to talk, man. I'll join your podcast just to listen to you. I don't even need to talk. I'm just gonna listen. It's just
So the thing that's funny though, Gurney, Nick here, and Crystal, right, is the problem is, and this might be something to break open too. The problem is on Twitter, the conversations get distilled into binaries, right? And so to be full disclosure, right, walking into this podcast, Gurney, I watched your Twitter video where you talked about game difficulty
Yeah.
and talked about, like, stop asking the people who are gaming at this level to come down to this level.
Yeah.
And that's where I think you and I are actually of like mind.
Yeah.
But on Twitter, that conversation gets distilled to where if I waded into your thread, you and I would have been arguing and fighting, right?
Probably.
Not you specifically, but but people. So a lot of these things, and this is what I get to, like, a lot as we're talking tonight, and this is why, Chris, I love your podcast because it addresses these. A lot of these issues are explosively complex, right? They are exponential in how many different vectors they take and how many vertices there are to this problem. They are not the simplified, distilled conversations that 95% of people have on Twitter. And I love what you said earlier this week, Crystal. I think you were responding to Boki, and he was like, everybody's fighting about this, fighting about that, and you're like, yeah, we just take our conversation into a thread, and that's where we talk about it behind closed doors, because that's where we can actually pull it apart and talk about all these complexities.
Yeah. Which I love talking about the complexities, but it's hard to talk about the complexities when I don't mind somebody having a different difference of opinion. I actually like that because I learn a lot and I'm a less myopic gamer because I've chosen to absorb more that I'm getting from my peers. But I don't like the toxicity and the anger and like I'm
Or
going to legislate your fun. Like, who
when
are
someone's
you?
not thinking, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
was shit?
Yeah, I can be a douchebag on Twitter sometimes.
No,
guys.
you
Yeah,
just
Sorry.
you
we
tease.
all have
You tease a
limits, but I
lot.
mean, yeah.
Yeah, so in
Oh,
your video spot was incredibly thought provoking. 90 a good chunk of what I've talked about tonight. Yes, some of it was theory that I've been compiling and making notes about for a long time, but a lot of things were especially poignant and particular to the things that you mentioned in that Twitter video post, and caused me to kind of in the past my take on kind of the topic we're talking about, and during some of the things you talked about was probably a little combative, just in terms of like I don't have time for a Souls game, right?
No, I don't blame you.
That's not my life,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Right.
But I think the real meat of that conversation is the things that we've been talking about tonight, right? About all these
that's where
different
I
elements and what
that's where
appeals
I
to
got it
gamers.
from. Is like he was talking and I was thinking to myself, self, because I do talk to myself out loud because I'm slightly insane. And I really wanted to know, was I a like am I a better gamer now or are games made different? Like
Uh,
I didn't know and I really wanted to know the answer and I said, fuck it, we're gonna do an episode on it because like this is just stuff that's really fun to
the
dive into and I love that it turned into what it turned into.
I
Which
think
is
too, like just real quick too, like I think 70% of the time I'm misunderstood on Twitter. But again, like it is because it's about brevity. Like you have to fit as much potency into your words as possible, and you're going to offend people. But I think if people really care enough, if they wanted to talk to you, like you can. I think you can clearly tell that we can have a civil discussion if we're open to it.
yeah,
And I'm of the mindset if we are opposites, then we have something to learn from one another. And that's why I personally like to debate on Twitter is because I do like to strike thought provoking things. And when I first met my wife thought I was a big asshole. And but that's like too that's like what drew her in. That's what got her attention. And then I diffused that and now we love each other. She love we it's iron sharpening iron, and I think like too that's also part of my problem is because everything seems there's almost like a sterileness, and you need to introduce a little bit of like yeast into the bread, and you need to provoke people and then let them know, hey, I'm not your enemy. Like we have things to talk about, let's talk about it. Like I'm your friend. I'll be honest, I don't have a ton of people on Twitter that I don't like because I think everybody on Twitter is misunderstood, in my opinion. And
yeah,
I think if you can actually sit down and you can have a conversation with somebody and you want to learn from them, you'll learn so much. Like listening to you, Logic, like you're already like one of my favorite like minds, like because you can extrapolate your ideas in scientific ways that you can measure. Like you're literally measuring fulfillment. Granted, your fulfillment is your own, and we each get fulfillment in different ways. Like I'm philosophical, so I love occult ideas and shit that just like gets into my soul and makes my psyche explode, and then I have to work through it. Whereas like some people don't want that. Some people don't like that. But to me, I think it all boils down to self improvement. Like when you're playing a racing game, even you feel yourself getting better. You're always coming in last, and then slowly start passing the cars. Like you're getting better. There's like enjoyment. That's like so fulfilling. You know what I mean?
I think we
Yeah.
talked to, I think when we talked about like map size and game size, we were talking about how do we monetize our fun experience. We were trying to figure out, is there a formula to do that? And Logic just dropped that formula, that EROI.
yeah.
Well, in the
Uh,
swing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kira.
no, no, no. No. What I wanted to say is that, yeah, main problem about Twitter as well is that, I don't. I have this impression on Twitter sometimes. I don't really think a lot of people know what they actually want. You know, like they talk and argue about something, but they always give me the impression that they don't know what they really want. So they're like they're being brought into an argument. They're bringing themselves to argue until they find out, or until they find what it is they actually want. Which is the
Mm.
the problem sometimes, is that it can get toxic if it takes too long to find what you want, because it gets irritating, it gets annoying, because the feeling that you want to know something but you cannot know it, and it's just an annoying feeling. And that's like my point of view sometimes, in a lot of people on Twitter, is just they don't know what they really want, so they argue to find out what they want, and the shorter the argument is, the better the conversation. But the longer the argument is, the argument the conversation gets worse. And
Now,
about you, sorry, about you, Logic. I think you also one of those guys that I can relate to myself and Gurnico. I always said that when people ask me, "Is gaming my hobby?" I was like, "It's not really a hobby. It's more like a way of life for me, because I just can't imagine life without it anymore." And I give so much thought into it. I don't think you give so much thought to a hobby that much, unless it is your way of life,
I don't know
True
what I would
that.
like
do.
part of your way of life. Yeah, basically.
I
And I
would.
think you guys are like that. Yeah,
I
and
don't
I,
know what
fi-
I would do.
I like finding people like that, and it's hard to find people like that on Twitter, because they're not open about what they want, while
Well,
you guys are open about what y'all want, and that's why you know you can convey that. Sorry, Crystal.
no, I'm just saying. Logic said, "Gamers, know thyself."
Yeah,
Hell
That
yeah, they
dude,
do, man.
like, uh, yeah, that's actually huge. I'm excited to see the EROI, because I really want to nail down those four things and determine what it is. From if you guys do it, Akira and Gurney, if you guys do it, I want to see yours.
I
yeah,
think it
I'll
all
do it.
boils down to self-discovery, honestly.
Yeah, it
Like,
is. Yeah,
self-discovery. Am I capable? Yes, I can overcome these odds if I want to. Yes, I can get better. Games are made to be beaten. There's nothing that's not made to be beaten
yeah,
game-wise. Like the tools are there at your disposal, and I think yeah. I honestly, for me personally, it all boils down to self-discovery and self-improvement. I want either to learn a new idea that's going to make me see the world in a new way, a fresh perspective. I like to think. Like I love hearing all the different perspectives. That's why Twitter is so addicting to me, is because I love the brevity of thought. And whereas like Instagram is just pictures of people and what they're doing, and I'm like blah blah blah. I don't care about that. I care about ideas, and ideas really embed in the human psyche, and that honestly, ideas are what make us grow, and I want to
yeah,
grow. I want to grow.
yeah,
Yeah, and we're also different. So what we're going to be attracted to and what our ideas is. It sounds like I might be more like Logic. I don't watch TV. If I have TV time, it's going to be a video game, hands down. But I also know that my real life can be stressful, and I know what my time constraints are. So I might be turned off by a really long game or a really long grind. Saying that
yeah,
that EROI for me, I know that time management is definitely in that.
yeah, and so caught up in that mix of what you and Gurney mentioned is right. It is very much right. The reason I set out to build that map and that diagram was I was trying to figure out a thing, right? I was expending time, and I've gone through a few arcs, right? I went through, being a lifelong gamer and somebody who loves games. I went through a point, my most recent time in grad school, where I was like, I want a game, but this thing is a 2.5 year thing. Um, I'm not going to stop playing games for 2.5 years till I get done with that part of school, right? But I had to learn to tailor and package what my gaming experiences were going to be. So that's kind of where ERI really kind of came to the fore, because I was like, what I get out of a gaming experience has to be packaged in a very tight timeline. It has to be during my study break at night, right? And there has to be a way for me to carry that from that tight study break time into a larger time window on the weekend. And so I started figuring some of those things out. And until you decompose a lot of those things, and put those things in piles and buckets, it's difficult to try and figure those things out. And that was kind of my path through that that self discovery. To swing back to what you were talking about before, Crystal, going back to what we were talking about with the Assassin's Creed, I feel like over the arc of the design path of Assassin's Creed, the point of the EORI has changed, right? In the early part, the point was to get to the story. Now it's about loot and progression more so.
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
if
Yeah.
if that differs for you, if you put different values on that, then your takeaway from an Assassin's Creed kind of game is going to change over time.
Yeah.
This the ERI actually changes the perspective on how also on how to measure games in general. Basically,
mhm.
like you cannot really call a game good or bad anymore because of the EROI, because it's going to be measured on how it spoke to you. It's not going to be like this is a bad game or it is a good game. It's basically the question is going to be how it spoke to you based on
Yes.
your EROI, which changes things for me. For example, I'm in Twitter. I'm a huge fan of Yakuza games, the Yakuza games. I'm a huge fan of them. I know why I love them, and I'm very addicted to them. But the EROI kind of makes me think like, what exactly? Why am I so addicted to it? What makes it tick for me? And Yakuza is a game that is a mixture of a lot of things. You know, you got comedy, you got drama, you got a great story, you got a great combat, you got mini games, you got side stories that are also fun, you got great characters, and and music basically. So with the EROI, Yakuza is actually a bit of a challenging game to measure because it's a mixture of so many things. Like you can have racing in it if you want. You can have some shooting in it if you want. It's a lots of such big
It's like
mixtures.
adult single player Mario Party almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
that's kind of funny, but
EROI
yeah.
is kind of hard to measure a game like that for me. I'm kind of like thinking right now, like how can I measure a game like that when it's such a mixture of so many things, but it's also maybe it's a mixture of so many things I love, basically.
So
Uh, yeah,
instead of trying that, let's
yeah,
all, right, because we know the center is optimal fulfillment.
yeah.
So
Optimal fulfillment. Yeah.
let's all bring up one game that we've played that gives us optimal fulfillment. Because
Uh,
I want to hear
it
what
is optimal fulfillment counts like, for example, something that looks cool to you, that just looks badass when you play. Does that also count as optimal fulfillment?
oh well
For you, it could vary.
it could be. I mean, the terminology really just means, and Logic is going to correct me if I get this wrong because
Uh,
this is his formula.
yeah.
What brings you the most joy and the most happiness, and what feels the most complete and cohesive and well-rounded to you? So, what like one title just makes you say, "Holy shit, this had everything that's important to me."
Oh yeah, optimal fulfillment. I can think of. Sorry, I can actually think of three games for that. One is a PS2 game called God Hand. It gives me ultimate optimal fulfillment because it's just a joy to see what I do uh, in the game basically, or what I can do in the game, because there's also a lot of things you can discover what you can do. The other one is Judgment, from the Yakuza makers, because it has everything I want. I love mystery. I love detectives. You got a detective protagonist. You got you got comedy. You got Jackie Chan like action, and I love Jackie Chan. And basically, it has everything I want in a game. Beat 'em ups. I love hand to hand combat, and anything I watch and play, anything hand to hand combat. So that is, and the third one would be Vanquish.
Shinji
Vanquish
Mikami.
is a game that I always said, and I'm always gonna keep on saying, it's a third person shooter game that I think I have never played in other games before. There's just something in Vanquish that captures what I want, even though I didn't know that I wanted it. But I only knew that I wanted it after I played the game, and that is like ultimate optimal fulfillment for me, because it's just I discovered something that I want without knowing that I want it. And Vanquish is like one of those games who gave me that feeling, basically. How about you guys?
That
What's
makes
yours?
sense. Gurney, what are yours?
I mean,
Or
well, since
singular.
he's going three, I'm gonna go 3-2 with very specific differences. Well, one of them I would say is definitely Red Dead Redemption 2. And that's kind of my turn my brain off game, but it's still like extremely satisfying and fulfilling. And the reason being is because it feels like there's a complexity of mechanics And though you don't need to use everything in there, that game to me is about role playing as a cowboy. And so I can I can double tap one of the buttons and I can swing my gun around my finger. And it's like that just that mechanic alone fulfills so many fantasies
Yeah.
that I had growing up as a kid. And it's
Yeah.
like the fact that so people love the dog on the gameplay, but for me the it's all the complexities. There's a richness to it. The fact that you have to tap the trigger once to cock it, the gun, and then you tap it again to shoot, and then you have to tap the trigger again to cock it again. Like there's literally a feeling of handling that gun, and then the fact that you can take your guns out and clean them, you can set up a camp by a stream and listen to nature, and there's such an intent to everything in that game. Like the story is incredible and it can make you cry. There's just a rich complexity to that game. If you really put the time into understanding all the deep intricacies, I think the gameplay actually starts to get better and your mind acclimates to it. And to me, it just, man, is that a potent game for me. Two would be like the Souls games, like Bloodborne and stuff like that. And it's just because I see results. I start out, and that's the thing. It seems like no matter how many of those games you've played, every time there's a new one, it's difficult because there are slight variations, and you have to relearn the game. But seeing the results and beating a final boss and enduring the suffering, like I've said on the previous podcast, it makes life easier, like because you've overcome such odds that you've actually experienced personal growth that can make life easier because the game is so fucking hard. And then I would say honestly, I'm just gonna go with those two because I don't want to take up too much time. I think that those two is good enough for me.
Those are good too. Logic,
Yeah.
do you want to go with your 1, 2, 3, whatever you decide?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll maybe go with just two like Gurney did because I want to use my third slot just to kind of circle back to one thing that Kira mentioned. So one thing, and we can break it apart sometime later in another discussion. One thing with me is I do want to make sure that I accurately convey that this concept of eROI and things that lead to my concept, my model of optimal fulfillment. I do look at that as a separate thing from my, I hate to say judgment, but like from how I would characterize the goodness of a game and its design, and when I extrapolate that further to what I would have in my mix as a game of the year contender, right?
Makes
Or
sense.
in our parlance, what we call our gaming superlatives, right? So these things that yield my model, they are not necessarily the thing that I equate to what I would say. I appreciate games that hit in ways that don't appeal necessarily to me. I acknowledge their design, I acknowledge their art, and I love having those conversations. But those don't necessarily yield the games that I want to spend my time onboarding
Mm.
with. Um, so for me, this optimal fulfillment, which kind of equates to kind of what game would you take if you could only take one game to, and we're marooned on an island, right? What game would you take?
Yeah.
First I would say Far Cry 5. For me,
Oh.
there's if you play mouse and keyboard on PC, there's some mechanical feedback there, a little minor, not as complicated as a flight control system or but there's cognitive joy there in terms of, and one of the things I love about Far Cry 5 is as you take down each encampment, there's this little pre-assault period ritual that I go through where I go to a tree. I actually have my character take a knee, right? And I kind of look at the map, right? It's kind of I look at the map. I kind of visualize, okay, what do I see? What do I hear? What's the dispersion of the troops? What is the optimal way to take this thing down? It's a little less chaotic than Just Cause, where you can kind of go in, but there's still an element of I need to create some havoc and some chaos, right, to occupy some of their time. I need to be a little covert, but I also need to like get the job done, right? So I start figuring out where all the angles are and all of what's the verticality of this particular encampment, right? Can I get up to a place and hide there? And I go through this kind of pre-war plan, and then I execute, right? And so there's my cognitive joy of like, drawing the map in the dirt, right, so to speak.
Mm.
There's definitely a progression model there. You unlock weapons and vehicles and animals, and Like
Mm.
you groom kind of how you're gonna kind of grow up in the game, and then there's a story, right? As you unfold the different 5 chapters of the different members of the cult that you take down, that you can experience. So that is a game that, even though it's my optimal fulfillment, I probably don't play it enough. But that's there. I would probably put Destiny 2 up there
Oh,
as well, because there
Nice.
is a deep, rich story and lore there. I don't always dig that deep onto some of that stuff, but I've definitely had my time periods where I've played through the entire campaigns. I've gotten on board for the season passes and played the chapter oriented content that they've put out there. I have this tapestry in my mind of a story that's been woven of my particular guardians, and you know, in the way that they're kind of the Green Lanterns of the galaxy, in the experiences that they've had, and how they've progressed. And I've gotten all my armor and weapons and stuff like that. Um, and then I will pick a third one. Probably my last one, because I have to give this game some cred. Um, I would also probably add the Division 2 in there.
Ah,
Well, for one reason, because it hits on this topic that we talked about earlier, tutorial. Absolutely, hands down, to me, the best onboarding that there's ever been in a game. Just in that, like, if have any of you played the Division 2?
Yep.
a little bit.
Okay.
yeah.
So if you remember, like, you start that game, and literally like 60 seconds after you enter the game, you're in
Lighthouse.
combat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you meet the person, she takes you outside, and as soon as you step outside, you get shot at.
Yep.
Right? She
Yeah.
gives you some gear, and the game starts, right? And it's such and there's such an alacrity to the start and ramp up of that game that I love. There's a down point that they don't teach you everything that you need to know about the gear and the progression system. You have to figure some of that out, but I love that onboarding, and then I love just how also no load times on that game, right? And, I mean, mostly you
Yeah.
traipse around all of DC
Yeah.
with very little load times until you get into
Yeah, very
specific
little.
missions. Yeah, in a day before, the Xbox Series X and S and PlayStation 5 and all that. So I got to give that game some cred, as well as heading towards that optimal fulfillment zone for me.
I
It's
didn't
a
play
great
that game enough. I didn't own that game. My friend owned it, and I didn't get to play the beginning. I played it a little bit with him at
It's a
his
great
crib,
game.
so now I'm like, I'm missing out on that fucking onboarding. Okay,
Dude,
so
can I just say too, like, it's amazing,
Uh,
like, listening to everybody talk about their games. I feel like this is something that's really missing. Is there's a framing, there's a framing that's missing, where, like, hearing people talk about what they love about games makes me, like, want to play those games, because, like, it's so important to, like, hear other people's perspectives. And we just, I don't think, like, we get enough rich perspective deep diving. Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just so amazing, you know?
That's
You guys
true.
are awesome.
By the way,
I like you guys.
Logic, I want to ask you, because you got this technical way of thinking. When I ask you who are like top 3 favorite characters in gaming, who are you gonna give?
Man, let me say one thing. Let me let Crystal go ahead. Let me think about that, because I don't know that I have an answer right off the top of my head.
Oh,
But the one thing I want to say, Gurney, I said almost virtually the exact same thing last week, like participating in this panel discussion. I walked away for all the stuff that we go through on Twitter, which sometimes to me is a negative downward nosediving kind of
yeah,
experience. I
yeah,
walked away from that conversation last week invigorated, energized, and wanting to go play games. And one thing I've been meaning to mention to you, Chris, like what you are doing here with this is so super important in the gaming space, and it's
yeah,
needed, right?
yeah,
Because so many of the podcasts and so many of the conversations are about getting hits and clicks and popularity contests, and very little analysis, and, as
war.
Gurney said, deep diving, right, and really decomposing a lot of these topics. And
Yeah,
I feel like your effort to give these conversations breathing room is a thing that is significant and of value and of importance, and center of mass in the gaming community.
I'm a little emotional, right? Right.
no,
Like,
It's
that's
really
what I
true.
great.
wanted.
It's one
It's
of
what I
the
wanted to do.
it's one of the best podcasts I've been in. Gotta be honest. Yeah,
Stop. You
because
guys are gonna.
no, I mean, because I've been looking for this kind of conversations, because I always this is one of my major complaints. Like, modern gaming a lot talks about this numbers like the resolution, the frame rates, and the freaking graphics and all that. That and but I'm seeing less and less people talk about why do you love this game? What is it that makes this game tick for you? What is it that what makes you replay this game basically? What is it that absorbs you? What makes you addicted to it? Like what is it? Like I wanna hear that because I don't want to hear that you just love the graphics or the frame rate is so smooth or the resolution is beautiful. The resolution is beautiful. I like seeing that, but I don't want to hear that all the time. I want to hear like what is so beautiful about it. Like maybe because it's so detailed. Like Red Dead Redemption got this so detailed city that it almost looks real. Like the resolution is great, but I'm looking at this city and it looks like a great city with so much detail that even on a lower resolution, I can still see it's a beautiful city.
And the horse
And
nuts. Horse
yeah,
nuts.
yeah, that and
Detail.
that's what I want you to tell me. Don't tell me about this basic stuff about resolution and graphics, and tell me about the characters. What is it that you love? Is it the gameplay? Is it the controls, the mechanics, little things like the gun animation? For example, I have not played Dishonored yet, but I saw this
Mm.
Wooly showed me this video of Dishonored, and I saw this freaking knife spinning animation from the game, and I'm like, that made me sad. Like I want to play that. That looks really cool. Like with a nice. But yeah, those are little things. Uh, what I want to. Have from a conversation, and even in the technical part, and this is not even technical on the technical how games are made. It's basically technical on measuring why people are having fun with games. It's like a it's a conversation I've never had before. To be honest, I've never had a conversation like this before, and I never even thought that it's possible to have a conversation like this before. That's why I was pleasantly surprised that Logic can that Logic was able to measure that. And to be honest, Logic, if I get to hit you up on Twitter, I would love to like one time invite you on Wooly's podcast because Wooly loves that kind of stuff. That what you do, what you basically showed me. He loves that stuff, and yeah, I might hit you up. And
Everybody
yeah,
needs
again,
to see the
thank you again.
ROI and do it. All y'all need
Exactly.
to do it.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
I,
Okay, I have to
I,
do my three
yeah.
games real quick,
Yeah.
don't
You
I?
too. Yeah.
I'm terrible on the I'm incapable of picking a favorite. So, oh my god, it's okay, optimal. Okay. Without thinking about my little quadrants. Okay. What games made me go, "Holy fucking shit. This had everything I wanted it to have." Last of Us 2. If you
Yeah.
can fuck me up emotionally to the point that
Mm,
I was so uncomfortable, I was
yeah.
so upset, I had so my emotions were wild. It was like dark and depressing, but then like
Yeah.
sweet and saccharine, and I couldn't get my bearings, and that was such a beautiful experience. And all of the technicality and the gunplay and just everything about it was holy shit. And it was strategic and environmental and good God Almighty. Uh, Fallout New Vegas, dude. I
Oh.
love
Ah.
decision making. I love consequences. I love story arcing. I fucking love that game. Love
Oh.
Obsidian. They're a god for me.
Yeah.
Uh, and Horizon Zero Dawn. Love that game.
Oh.
Love.
Sorry. That.
I love Aloy. I love the machines. I love the environment. I love the art. I love the way it made me feel. I love the story, and I am fucking po hyped for Forbidden
Forbidden
West.
West. Forbidden West
Forbidden
looks
West.
like a major upgrade, man. I'm not gonna lie, it looks like major. I didn't expect that much of an upgrade for Forbidden West, but
Oh,
that
it's
looks
just like
amazing.
Zelda because she's on a
Yeah,
parachute. Twitter.
yeah. That I mean, Logic. I'm sure you have some words about that about games inspiring each other. I mean, I really, I've voiced my frustration about it before, like be bad about inspiring each other like that. As long as it's not borderline copying plagiarism, like that's where the line is drawn. But if it's only being inspired to spice up gameplay even more because they saw something really great from this game, so they want to try something like that as well in their game. I don't think there's really anything wrong with that. I don't think people should really fault developers for that. It's actually enhancing the experience, and I don't understand why anyone would be
Because it's
upset with that.
Twitter and they want to complain. Everything. It's
Yeah,
hard to make
yeah.
new content. Everything's inspired from something. That's
Yeah, it's getting harder to be innovated because it's just ideas are just too many
Because
now.
nobody plays enough Souls games to get.
or
Well, that's one of the things I go back to is right. I forget what the byline is for the discussion of Hollywood, but like there's only like 7 real original stories in Hollywood, and every movie is a derivative of those. Like
Yeah,
True.
the video games are derivative. Everybody builds. It's like you said, Crystal. I don't know. I could probably argue that there's nothing that hasn't already been done in some capacity.
Yeah.
I think as you mentioned, Akira, it's fine. One of the things, and this is one of the big arguments I get into, you go back to the Nintendo Switch and people say, well, nobody wants to play those old games. Like, people don't play every single game that's out at the time that it comes out. I love
yeah,
the Switch because it allows me to swim backwards to things that aren't in my backlog that I chose to ignore or bypass. I'm not a big, huge Skyrim fan. I don't have 40 to 80 hours to dump into a singular story that involves a lot of walking around. I'm being negative, but but the point is in my quadrant, right? That's a game style and design that doesn't hit. But as I mentioned last week, I think I love the concept of having that game and putting it in the Switch and taking it on the go, where I have more time to kind of
Yeah.
digest it. And so, if you haven't played Zelda, right, or if you played, Breath of the Wild, and there was a threshold and a point where I didn't consume as much of that as maybe I should, and another game comes along that looks kind of similar and kind of has some of the same mechanics. I think Oceanhorn on iOS is another game that's kind
yeah,
of, and those games are shorter and more digestible. It's completely fine to repackage them and present them in a slightly different format.
yeah,
Every game that comes out is a game for someone. Just because it's not a game for you doesn't mean that you have to
yeah,
rag on it.
It's
Um,
Yeah.
the,
That is
the
so
last thing I want
true.
to the last thing I want to mention, I wanted to swim back to Kira's question. I have a list of 2 out of the 3, but
ah,
the one that I wanted to throw out is such a weird pick. I didn't even think it. Thomas Magruder from Gun.
oh,
It's a not a lot of people know about Gun, which is kind of it's almost kind of a Red Dead Redemption 2, Red Dead Redemption kind of game. It came out, I want to say, in the early 2000s. It was by Activision when they used to do other things than just Call of Duty. I don't finish a lot of games all the way through, and one of the things about that game is I did play that game all the way through, and one of the reasons I did is because that villain, that bad guy, made me so angry with the things that
oh,
unfolded in some of the scenes that I was super invested in taking him down. And so, and the character to me feels a little like I think about he feels kind of like Swearingen from Deadwood. And so, so that's my one pick about
one, yeah,
influential characters for me from gaming.
yeah.
Oh, just
The
one.
You got a second? Or yeah, second one? Or
Quickly, I think my second one that I would pick is Prophet from the Crisis series.
oh,
Just
Oh,
because
oh,
as that narrative unfolds, I became kind of emotionally attached to his notion of sacrifice, and the
oh,
things that he gave up and the things that he had been through. Um, and how he went from this journey of being just a soldier, to kind of being something that was more significant, to the way the world unfolded.
dude,
Crisis is great.
you don't hear that a lot.
you
That
don't.
he's a favorite. You don't hear that a lot. That's a pleasant surprise. Gun is a game that
Because
I actually saw that game before. I have not played it, but I have saw it before. Is it really villain can really drive you crazy like that?
To me, he did. You don't engage and interact with him in anything other than like cutscenes until the very end of the game, and so it's just like as I saw each of those cutscenes and the things that he did, I was like, this mofo needs to go down. Like, this is unacceptable. So I just felt invested in staying around to the end until I finally got a chance to go with him mano a mano, so to speak.
Yeah. We are going to have to wrap this up here a little bit because it is almost midnight where I live, and my wife will
Yeah.
turn into a pumpkin. So I'm going to have to do my duties of giving some attention. But I do want to bring up on the innovative point. I'd like to point
Yeah.
out major innovation: Nintendo Switch OLED. I mean, that's innovation in naming. If
Uh,
we like, I mean, that's if you really want to
Nintendo.
talk about just innovation,
Little
the OLED.
backhanded compliment
Yeah.
there.
Nintendo is just yeah.
As
Nintendo's a,
KMed said, if anybody who follows KMed or watches the Backlog Chronicles, he compared the concept of naming the Nintendo Switch OLED to the concept of going, oh, it's a fucking hot pocket. Like it's hot and it has shit in it. That was probably one of the best. So as we close it, this episode 13 is fucking awesome. These things keep getting better and better and better every time. So why don't everybody just take a quick minute or two and do like maybe some closing thoughts or just say something that you want to say. Akira, we'll start with you.
yeah, like I said, this is hands down one of the best podcasts I've been in because, like I said, I didn't expect to have a conversation like, or to even know someone who communicates like that about games. Because I've always I've always looked at games as personal experiences. That how the way they make you feel, basically. And
Mhm.
because when I talk about games and I say way of life, it's just games make me feel like whenever I remember playing a game I love, it's just that all that feeling comes back, basically. And those are the best feelings. Even if you just hear a song or see a picture of that game, and all that memories just comes back to you. This just comes back, and you just just feel appreciative that you experienced that, basically. And also the way that when somebody or some you see a game and that gets recommended and you play it, you get thankful that you also got the experience again. Those are like what I hold on to in gaming, is what the experience meant to me, basically. So to be able
Mhm.
to measure fulfillment like that, I never thought about it being possible before, because I also ask myself what makes me want or like this game so much. And I was struggling to find an answer because it's just all emotion and feeling. And the way you broke it down, though, is it changes perspective, because you can actually break down your own, let's say, emotions for a game, but in more of in a measuring stick, basically, with a EROI. And yeah, I didn't expect that was possible. So that is just such a win for me in this podcast. Thank you again for having me, and I'd love to get back on it if I get the chance, because it's really great. It's really good.
Awesome. Gurney, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Logic's an alchemist, man. He breaks down all the ingredients. Man. I love it because I just think I think conversation is just very important to progressing the gaming culture and the community. We're so boxed into our tweets and fighting each other, which is fun sometimes. I'm not gonna lie, but there's nothing quite like a conversation to see the face behind the tweets. Um, and something that Logic hit on again with his little backhanded compliment was Activision. They only make Call of Duty games. Assassin's Creeds are Ubisoft only makes Assassin's Creed. Like that, I guess when I boil down what I mean of like modern gaming being dull, it's not that modern games are boring. I think they're really great. Like imagine being a new player playing Assassin's Creed for the first time. It's your first video game experience. Of course it's going to be fucking awesome. Like but for people who have been gaming for so long, it's like you've tasted it. You've seen it. It was awesome when Activision was making Tony Hawk and Guitar Hero and all these amazing things, but now it's almost like the surprise has been taken out of it. What's Activision working on? Well, probably a new Call of Duty game. What's Ubisoft working on? Well, probably one of the 3 franchises they focus on. Not that there's anything wrong with them. I think they're all great, but I think that kind of encapsulates what I would love to see more of the industry is just risks. I want to see Ubisoft and I want to see Activision make other things because there's so much talent, and video games are such an untapped medium, and we're so focused on what works that things are getting so safe that we just need to introduce just ideas that blow our minds again, stuff that we haven't experienced. And I guess that's my closing statement of old versus new of what we were talking about. But you guys are awesome. Logic, it's wonderful to talk to you. Crystal, freaking amazing host as always. Akira, great to finally hear your voice. I love you guys seriously, and I think that this podcast has been awesome because it just shows us that we all have so much in common, which is our love for games, and we just need to talk more. It was amazing how
Yeah.
I was ranting on Twitter, and she's just like, let's just talk about this, let's have an episode about it. And here we are extrapolating our ideas and finding common ground and like oohing and awing over our differences. Logic, I love the way you think, man. Nice to
I
talk
told
with
y'all.
you.
I
Yeah.
told y'all I had a big dub. Logic, why don't you go ahead and go with your closing statement?
So first of all, your compliments are incredibly humbling. So, like Crystal earlier, I'm actually having a slightly difficult time talking now. This has been great. You guys have been great co-hosts. This is literally. I mean, I have a job, right? I have a day job. My back shift job, right? The second half of my life. This is literally what I've been working for and towards for um, innumerable numbers of years, right? It's just to maneuver into a spot on a map where I can go and engage in conversations about these topics with other gamers. It's been a struggle to get there and a struggle to find the people to engage on those topics because, as Akira mentioned, so much of the conversation is just about getting from A to Z, right, and not pulling these things apart, and then people want to be combative because, as I mentioned on Twitter today, what I said was what's important is that we have a conversation about our differences of opinion and perspectives and the hows and the whys behind that. It's not important for us to have a conversation about who's right? But so much of the conversation on Twitter and elsewhere is about distilling down to who's right or who's wrong about a thing. As Akira mentioned, often not even founded in what an individual actually wants, right? But about how much you know clout and collateral they can build up simply because they win an argument. So it's been great. It's been very enlightening. I joked, Gurney, about us having that difference of opinion, but it's very enriching and important to me to hear and to participate in the discussion about like why does a Souls game appeal to a person, and then to have an opportunity to express why a Souls game doesn't appeal to me at
Yeah.
this moment in time in life. Right, I can see being in a different place where that would be a better fit. Um, but for other dynamics, it doesn't. So, great conversation. Like I said, Crystal, you're a great facilitator, and as Gurney said, like there needs to be more of this. This, to me, is what every podcast should be like.
Aw.
If things were done right, so to speak.
Well, this bad boy is going to keep going. Don't you worry, and you're going to see everybody hear more and lots more people in the community. I think if this episode taught us anything, right? If you gamed from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, whenever you started, is that we all have a passion for this, and if we could put our differences aside and our frustration aside and our bitterness aside, we can all come together to agree that gaming is absolutely fucking beautiful and it's an art and it's something that can bring us together. So let's not be so divisive and let's learn from one another and encourage one another, and let's not shit on developers, and let's not engage with the garbage journalism or the rumor mills, and let's just like fucking be game junkies together. So thank you so much for watching episode 13. Be sure you follow all these guys on Twitter because they're the real MVPs, and we will see you guys next week. Thanks for watching, everybody.